Well, great to see you.
You as well.
So, no humility allowed. What's your secret? What makes you a better podcaster?
It's just that usually people have better things to do if they're smart than to host a podcast. And I wonder about other fields that are like this, where it just like smart people don't do this. So it's pretty easy to do a good job.
Don't you have better things to do?
I don't. I mean, I've considered. Now I don't. Like now the podcast has grown. Now I don't. I mean, initially it was kind of a gap year thing. I graduated college and it was a way to kill some time.
People are scared of starting small projects because, right, what I'm hearing from you is you no longer have better things to do once the podcast has grown. So it did have this potential.
That's a great point.
It did have the potential for turning into something very interesting. It was just less well defined. It started out as like nobody watching it for probably a pretty long time.
Yeah, I would say that makes sense. Also, it is the case where it's hard to do it on the side the way I do it. I spend a week or two preparing for a single guest. And if you are somebody who has high opportunity cost for your time, just interviewing somebody for an hour and spending 2 weeks, it's just not something you would do even as a side project usually, right? So it's the kind of thing where it's hard to, I wonder how many domains in life that you could do it well, but it would just take an intense amount of dedication and concentration to do it.
If you do everything, you win.
Yeah.
For podcasts.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great quote. It's from, for the audience, it's from the Robert Caro biographies of Lyndon Johnson. It's one of Johnson's aphorisms.
Right. So the secret is something like becoming unemployed after college, which is right, a very scary thing to do. Then deciding to do this weird, poorly defined thing that also people frequently make fun of, right? Because people make fun of, oh, you're starting another podcast.
Yeah.
So it just kind of feels icky in a way to start doing this. And then spending an entire week preparing for a podcast. Yeah,
there was an article in the New York Times a few months ago that was talking about these women who were dating in New York City. And it would be, they were talking about how often the red flag would come up, that they go on a date with a guy and then they find out he has a podcast and they're like, I gotta get out of here.
So not having a girlfriend.
Now I do, so it's good.
Once you have a big podcast.
Yeah. You gotta get through the trough.
So what do other podcasters do wrong?
I feel like they don't even ask questions they care about, right? I mean, there's so many things they do wrong. Okay, so first of all, I don't want to name names, but there's a famous one, and he'll have on somebody who's the world expert in, I don't know, quantum computing, and then he'll ask him, what is love? Do you really care what this guy has to say about love? And if you do, like, why? Why does it matter? It's just completely irrelevant. And it's also stunning the extent to which, and this is something I've taken to heart and kind of makes me question the entire enterprise of podcasting, is you have people who have talked to the world's experts in a whole range of domains, and then they themselves don't seem that much more educated or literate or learned as a consequence. And that kind of makes you wonder, so for me, that means I can't just rely on the conversations to make me more knowledgeable. Like the work has to come separate from the podcast itself. Does that make sense? Like if these guys are talking to all these people and they're still stupid, then that podcasting is not going to make me smart. I got to do something else.
I have observed this as well. People almost like have the first conversation on a topic with an expert, regardless of how many experts in the field they already talked about.
Yeah.
It's more about pandering to the audience, where if you want to get the maximum number of views on a podcast, then it must be the first conversation on the topic, right?
Right. But it's often not even that. Like, I would be satisfied if often it was the case that if you were unfamiliar with the field, here's the questions you would ask. But it's just about getting to know them as a person. Oh, the stupidest thing people do is, okay, I don't know, maybe for some reason you think that their field gives them an understanding of love. Fine. But then the stupidest thing people do is ask about their backgrounds, right? So they'll be like, what was it like growing up in the Midwest? Who gives a fuck? I don't know why people do this. Like, why? You can just, who cares for the Midwest, right? They're here talking about like the history of China or something. Ask about that. Yeah, I don't know. It just kind of shows like you don't care about the subject. You're just here because they're high status or it's something you're supposed to talk about. Like, this is not the topic.
What are you doing wrong?
So part of it is asking esoteric questions as a way to kind of show I've read my stuff and I'm smart, but then are not that interesting or themselves the most important thing I could be asking.
So what makes an interesting question, though? Why for you asking someone about their technical topic they study is interesting, but asking them about love or their background is not?
An interesting question in the first place should be tractable and specific. Not always, actually, but that's usually a good heuristic. And asking what is love is just not a tractable question, and it's not something that the guest has likely to have a unique insight on. The reason you have that guest on is because you think there's something they can speak to, which would give greater insight on the topic. A random professor is not going to have an insightful take on love. Or they could if that's the thing they've studied, or you would have some reason to think they might. But this doesn't answer your question of what makes an interesting question. You know it when you see it, right? Yeah, I don't know. I feel like a lot of this is tacit. It's hard to articulate.
What's one aspect?
In some sense, the entire point of asking an interesting question, the question cannot be interesting in and of itself. The entire point is to elicit an interesting answer, right? So then the question is, what elicits an interesting answer?
Who do you want to interview the most?
Robert Caro.
What would you ask him?
He says that the entire point of these books is to inform voters about how their politics and government works. But if you read the books, what you learn is the voters matter very little, or the main drivers of history are these sort of larger than life figures. And it's not just Johnson and Moses. There are people around them who are these kinds of characters, and it centers around those characters. And so it does seem more Machiavellian than a sort of democratic treatise. It seems more like a guide for the future Johnson than it does for a guide for the voter. With Moses, the things I would ask is, after Moses is forced to retire, you go from a guy who has constructed almost all the highways in New York City. And after that, the projects that were going on at the time he retired have still not been completed to this day. The bridge he was retired from, for example. Now we have NIMBY, so we see the consequences of going too far in the opposite direction. I wonder if he thinks there's something to be said for a Robert Moses type figure of having that kind of authority in the city to cut through the kludge.
Do you think he succeeded at this?
Caro?
Yeah, at writing this guide.
No. Well, I think it's just because you can't. It's hard to convey through biography how to do it yourself. And it's interesting because Johnson himself didn't read biographies of figures, right? It was just an inborn Machiavellian talent. I don't think you read these volumes and you learn how to manipulate legislative chambers and things like that. I think it's a much more subtle and inbuilt talent.
So could it be, the Straussian interpretation of your Straussian interpretation is that Moses diverted people who could have done these things by writing. There is an esoteric interpretation of The Prince, right?
Yeah.
Is that it was written as an advice for wannabe dictators or wannabe princes, but in order to make them fail. So.
Oh, I see.
Because that's the thing about human culture, right? Is that it's always changing, and that it's changing because we learn from the previous generations.
Yeah.
The thing that's fascinating to me about Napoleon is that he was LARPing those who were before him. He grew up reading ancient Greek histories and French philosophers. Then Joseph Stalin was reading memoirs of Napoleon. And so if someone tries to do the thing that LBJ did, but in a way that's too obvious, just parroting, then we're going to notice this. We're going to be like, oh yeah, this clearly the guy is
I see. It make that archetype super obvious. By the way, the Napoleon example is even more interesting. I didn't realize that Stalin emulated Napoleon, but you can trace a tree in how in academics you have a sort of ancestry tree of this guy's thesis advisor was this guy, and you can have multiple Nobel laureates on the same tree. So then Napoleon is super interested in Caesar when he's a kid and teenager. Caesar's super interested in Alexander. The famous story of Caesar kneeling before the statue of Alexander.
Exactly the same thing.
And then Alexander is like his own father, Philip of Macedon, which he's conquered the Greeks and built the Macedonian phalanx. And what have I done so far? Yeah.
Do you think Kara would tell you the truth?
Oh, by the way, speaking of him telling me the truth, one thing that people have wanted me to ask him, and there's this guy who has sent me like a 4,000 word DM expressing, I think his handle is LBJ killed Kennedy. And just a bunch of like memos and pictures and shit about, Johnson was about to be kicked off the ticket. This is why he had the motivation. And here's Busby arranging this thing. So would he tell the truth in general about Johnson's character? Would he tell the truth about, I don't know, the assassination is a separate thing. I don't have any big conspiracy theories there. I thought that was just a funny anecdote. Would he tell the truth about what it takes to get into power? Presumably is what you...
Or why he wrote those books, right? Because that's what fascinates you the most is like, how the hell do you spend 50 years doing this? Like, can't be, like just because he was interested in LBJ or whatever. Like, it must be something greater. People don't spend 50 years being obsessed with like something for no good reason.
I don't know. I feel like people often do that. Maybe if you go to like a random academic department, people are obsessed about something that doesn't matter for any good reason for 50 years.
Well, that's not quite the same because you go like in academia, there's this social support structure. You can study whatever it is that you study, but you keep rising the hierarchy. For Moses, it's very different. It's, this solitary, unrewarding, just like long-winded, like unclear work. It does seem to me that people don't do this kind of thing, like in a way that's very obsessive. They can do the stuff as a hobby, but like in order to be really obsessed with something, like something that's difficult.
Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting because he himself exercises the aphorism which Johnson lives by: if you do everything, you'll win. And again, you see the example of you put in almost too much effort into something, more effort than any reasonable person would think is warranted. And that's what it takes to rise above the pack. And then so the question is, he clearly would not have put in this much effort if it was just a historical tale. He clearly thinks there's some sort of impact there. I feel like sometimes people are just motivated by search for the truth or obsession with a historical fact. And even his first book took him like 10 years or something, right? The one about Moses. In that one, you could say, well, the story wasn't told and he felt it was important in order to understand New York at the time. I think there's a much more direct path to impact there. But I do think, by the way, so this does contradict a traditional EA understanding of how impact happens. Of you have things that look plausible as you go in, of these career pathways. And nobody would say from an EA perspective that the way to change politics, which it did do, to change politics in urban governance for a generation, is to take 10 years to write a biography of the city commissioner. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see about that one. But to start write a biography about the guy who runs parks in New York City, and that probably did change urban governance in America. Much more deliberation and community input when projects are being made. The current sort of NIMBY, the institutions that support NIMBY, but that's a sort of derogatory thing. There's positive developments because of that too. That came part because of the awareness of, you ask these people and they'll give you the example of Moses. Moses is able to do all this. That's why we need these sort of community activisms and so on to overlook new developments and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about your parents?
Yeah. Although, by the way, I'm not one of the people who thinks that this is significantly informative about people's personalities. I think that's overemphasized even in biographies of trying to understand people, of like trying to understand their parents and so on.
Haven't you interviewed all of the people who believe the most in this kind of, parents mattering, not via culture?
Oh, I feel like it would be the opposite. Their genes matter, but not the way they raised you.
Right.
In that sense. Yeah, my dad's a doctor. My mom's she's like sometimes works as a tax accountant, but like is mostly stay at home. And then we moved to the U.S. when I was 8, and we kind of moved around Canada for about half a year, then North Dakota, then West Virginia, then Maryland and West Texas, and then I did university in Austin.
In a way, I learned a lot from this.
Say more? In what sense?
Coming back to the beginning of why did you start this podcast when, your friends didn't? One of the things that seems like was required was the ability to, and like the desire to do something, unexplored and unclear. And, what I hear is, your parents spend their lives traveling around. This seems like way more than expected, right?
I don't buy it.
Why are you reading too much?
No, because I also read these kinds of things in biographies, and I don't buy it because it's you always have to ask, does this happen to other people who go through a similar experience? Like Stalin is a great example where there's some biographies that say, oh, he was beaten by his parents or something, and that's why he killed millions of people. Lots of people are beaten by their parents, right? Very few people kill millions of people. I don't think
Stalin wasn't abused by his parents though.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
his parents do explain a lot because he did have his dad drank himself to death. But
it's Russia. Lots of parents.
Not only that, but in a way that's very unusual because his mom dominated the family. Yeah. And his mom was, a very strong woman who clearly, loved him differently than moms usually love their children. And, so when I read the biography of Stalin, I'm like, yeah, the pattern of, it does seem there is a little bit of a pattern that matches. Don't you think?
I don't know. I mean, just because there's so many people who go through that experience and then don't become dictators, then it's hard to. The proximal cause of what Stalin ended up doing and how he ended up there doesn't seem like the major.
Well, becoming a dictator is never an end in itself, right? It's something about becoming exceptional in some sort of way. And to me, again, when I observe people who have become exceptional, it seems that the kind of family that Stalin had is way more prevalent among them. Don't you think?
I don't even know if that's true. Trying to think through. In the sense that he became prevalent. I feel like I see examples of all kinds of things. Like Hitler's was raised by his dad, not his mom. And then Mao, if we're looking at the big three, he was raised by both his...
Hitler, so Hitler is exactly the same thing as Stalin, right? There is no mom figure in his life.
But in this case, there's no dad figure. So it just, in both cases, there's single parents. But there's lots of single parents.
Stalin did have his dad, he was present.
Oh, I thought, didn't he drink himself to death?
He did, but it was pretty late.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like a much more proximal explanation for Stalin is he has that Marxist-Leninist teacher in the seminary. Is that right? I feel like that kind of stuff is probably a much better explanation of how he became the person he became, and then all the things that were happening in Russia during that time, and the Cheka being super easy on him, letting him escape from Siberia, and so on.
Have books influenced you?
I remember I was super influenced by David Deutsch's book, The Beginning of Infinity, when I was in college, and just having these really all-encompassing theories of knowledge that also apply to these other domains. And though now I have actually, I wrote a blog post as a rebuttal to his sort of general claim about, the details are a separate thing, but so even though now I have quibbles with his worldview, it was just useful to have these sort of, here's my big take and how it explains everything in the world. Do
you have a theory of everything?
No.
Wait, so what's your problem with David Deutsch's theories?
Oh, his take is that
he's so respected. He's one of the most respected thinkers, I think, in this,
I feel like that's because people don't think about what he's saying. His main claim in The Beginning of Infinity is there are universal explainers. There's no gradients between animals and humans and AIs. It's animals are 0, humans and AIs are 1 in terms of how much we can explain, how much we can understand about the world. And he has these sorts of first principles reasons for explaining it. But actually, if you boil down to it, you can go at the logic, or you can just start at the implications of this theory. The implications of this theory is if AIs and humans will be equally smart, then all humans are equally smart to begin with, right? And it's clearly false that all humans are equally smart. Like clearly there's gradients between the smartest and the dumbest humans. And I had him on my podcast and I tried to nail him down on this. I probably didn't do a good enough job of it. But then if humans can vary in intelligence, surely AIs and humans can vary in intelligence.
This is very confusing to me because, so I haven't read his books. I started at the beginning of Infinity, but didn't end up finishing it. And if your representation of what he says is faithful, then it does sound, I guess, kind of weird. But then
he has all kinds of ways to get out of it. He'll say, for example, that, you can have computers that are more powerful than other computers, but they're universal in the same way. So the microcontroller in your fridge is also a Turing machine. Your M1 MacBook is a Turing machine. But the only like fundamental difference between them is memory and the processing speed. First of all, there's no proof that intelligence is universal in the same way. With Turing machines, we actually do have a proof that all Turing machines are equivalent. But more fundamentally, even if that were true, the actual difference in memory and time does matter, right? And you're just
not for a mathematician.
Yeah, but exactly. I mean, it would be like me saying, if you were to say, for example, an airplane is superior from getting from here to New York than a bicycle. And I'd say, fundamentally, all vehicles are universal vehicles. And the only thing that differs between them is like the power of their engine and the size of the battery or the size of and so it's like the ATP in your muscles is functionally equivalent to the jet fuel inside an airplane. Like, it's just like a gigabrain take that doesn't, like a bicycle is different than an airplane. If you're trying to get to New York, an airplane will obviously be much more powerful.
What I hear is that you read this, you thought about this for a little bit, and you were like, I don't think this quite works. But then he clearly is extremely intelligent, has influenced quite a few people intellectually, including you, even if not about history in particular, right? And he spent decades developing this, and so I guess what's missing here?
So his explanation is he's coming at this he was a person who came up with or realized that quantum computers could be more powerful than normal computers, and so he comes at the field from a very it was a sort of very first principles discovery. He had this paper in the 80s showing this, and in this case, this kind of like first principles thinking was really useful.
Wait, we don't know yet, right? Nobody's using quantum computers.
Oh, it's a separate question of whether practically we can run things faster, but the mathematics do support,
right? Okay.
That they can do things faster. And then so being able to define like a universal quantum machine and then like a universal Turing machine, that's a useful concept in there. And I think it just like misapplied here. But I can like explain his take of why he thinks like all humans. So he would say basically, listen, humans are software and we're running on hardware. Hardware is our minds. All hardware is a computer. It's a Turing machine, and all Turing machines are functionally equivalent. So you could presumably like speed up the mind by giving it more space and more time. We do this when we use pencils, pen and paper. That gives us more memory. So first of all, you'll notice that this doesn't address the point of, well, what if the software is more general, right? But then he'd say, well, we have no good reason for thinking that AIs will have a more general software. And if we don't have such a reason, then the principle of parsimony says that we should just assume that it won't be the case. I might be being unfair the way I'm characterizing it, but like I think that's roughly the take. Like we have no good reason for thinking it would necessarily be different.
Too much math is what I'm hearing. Too much desire for beauty and generalization and simplicity and a single theory of everything. Yeah,
and I don't want to like diss him or anything. I think he's like a super interesting thinker and has a lot of interesting. Separate from this, the book has so many interesting takes about all kinds of things. And even this is an interesting take. Say what you will about it. And I do appreciate people who put out interesting takes, even if they're wrong.
So what would you do if you didn't have this podcast?
I don't know. I'd be trying to start a startup probably.
Do you know what startup
I would be like some GBT rapper or something, I'm sure.
Is this the most exciting thing you can do? Really?
I guess I could try to, then maybe I'd say, well, alignment is really important, so I'd try to work on that. But I don't think I'd be, I don't know, I've never tried it, so I'm not sure how good I'd be at actually, doing actual research. And failing that, then the next thing would be trying to do a startup that takes advantage of these new capabilities somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Not join OpenAI or...
Yeah, but that would be included. Yeah, I would try. Yeah. But it would be either that or my own startup. But I guess I was including in that the category of like...
right.
Yeah.
But it would be very much in the AI space.
Yeah.
Nothing else matters.
No, I wouldn't even say that, because in the world where the takeoff is happening, other things do matter, like who's in political power and stuff like that. And what is the media environment like, and who has capital to deploy things and so on.
Right. But I guess it's still all about AI. It's kind of instrumental to the takeoff. What do you mean by takeoff is happening?
The AIs are like doing a bunch of R&D into how to how to make GPUs better and how to like make models better and so on. And this is stuff you've thought about as well. So
right. I mean, it's already happening, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We already live in this world.
Yeah. So even now, then the political power matters and the capital matters and these other things matter.
Right. Wait. So why have I know that you have experimented with starting GPT wrappers and startups, right? Why haven't you tried doing alignment?
I don't think it's like the kind of thing you can casually do, right? You'd probably have to spend, like I've read the papers, I've read the transformer circuit papers, and I've talked to researchers who are in this field, but I don't think.
I mean, even as a side project.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where I don't feel like the podcast would be good if I did it as a side project. And alignment seems harder than running a podcast. So I don't think that wouldn't be good as a side project.
Right. I guess this is interesting for me because I noticed that specifically for alignment, the fraction of people who say it's interesting and that this is the kind of thing that they might be interested in doing, but then they don't end up trying to do this because of this kind of feeling that because if you're starting any kind of a software startup, it seems like normal to spend a weekend coding something up, right? And it doesn't feel appropriate for alignment research. Like whenever there is a word research involved, it's like our association is that, or like people who do this kind of thing in the evening over the weekends are like crackpots, and that it's inappropriate in a way, and this prevents our exploration of the subjects. I think this at least like maybe I'm projecting, but I feel like this stopped me from trying to do any alignment research for a long time.
I think that's fair, but it also might be true. I mean, I don't know. You probably have a better handle on like what is it possible to do this over as a weekend project, or at least get started doing it as a weekend project?
I think so. Mm-hmm. I think.
But when I look at
I'm extreme in this, but I think you could do anything, or you can start anything as a weekend project, right?
Yeah.
I'm reading a physics textbook right now, and I spent a fair amount of time thinking about physics research ideas, even though I know nothing about physics, and they're all probably terrible, but it's still a good way to learn. I know it works.
It could be like multiple consecutive weekends, or like months of consecutive weekends. I think that's like that could make sense. Yeah.
Why does it feel icky?
It doesn't feel icky. It just I just have doubts that it would be my comparative advantage, especially given that I'm doing the podcast. Like it feels like, if you look at something like the breakthroughs that are happening, it would just be if maybe there's some conceivable world in which I could help with something like the margins of mechanistic interpretability. But given that the dozens of people are already working on it or something, the thing I'm doing over the weekend, I don't know. It feels like I should just make the next podcast instead of.
Right. You remember when you asked Tyler about traveling in history and in which ways is traveling similar to reading history? And his take was that travel wins actually, because he he read several hundred books about India and its history, and he traveled there only a few times, and he's like, oh shit, this is how it actually works. Like, this is how the country works, and this is how like history shaped it, and how and like India started to make much more sense. And remembering about this, I wonder about, if one thinks that alignment, for example, is important, then in which ways reading about alignment or interviewing people about alignment similar to or different doing alignment, and how much, right? Tyler never lived in India for years, and traveling for a week or two, one might argue it would only give you the very surface level like insight, just a glimpse. Or again, like many people look down on travel at all, but still seems important.
That's a really good point, actually. So you can imagine, for example, that doesn't Neil Nanda have this list of mechanistic interpretability problems, and you could just try to solve one of them as a way to better grok mechanistic interpretability.
Do that, or go to an alignment hackathon, or do a residency, or you have plenty of alignment researchers who are friends of yours, right? And just like ask to do a research project over a weekend with them.
No, that's a really good point. And actually, that quote is directly relevant to something else as well. That I'm preparing to interview this economist who lives in China about China, and I'm reading about how the standing committees work and how education works and all these different things. And I do realize that if I just like travel to China, I would. There's no way that this book. Do
you want to travel to China?
I should. I feel like I should in preparation for this podcast.
You can just arrive a week earlier, right? And just spend a week traveling in China.
Yeah, I'm doing the interview itself over Zoom, but I should just travel to China for the prep.
Don't do it over Zoom. Just go to China.
Yeah, I proposed to do it in China, and then he suggested we should do it over Zoom instead. But maybe I should insist that we should do it in China. But okay, on the 11th point, I think this is actually a really interesting point. I mean, so for the Ilya interview, I did just like code a transformer from scratch so that I could like ask him good questions about transformers and stuff. For the Dario interview, and this is not research itself, but I read all the transformer circuit papers. Like I try to actually understand them. I didn't just like read and skim them. And I like had long conversations with the people who wrote those papers about trying to understand superposition and everything. And then. It's not the same thing as like trying to do research myself, but like it was like, I don't know, visiting the hotels in a country rather than, but I wasn't like going to all the villages and like knocking on people's doors and asking how their lives are or something.
Right. I wonder what other areas of life are like this, where we, something really matters to us, but we keep reading books about the stuff and reading about its history and never end up traveling there. Maybe this is why podcast hosts ask famous physicists that come to their podcast about love, and instead of, in a way, in hope to learn something about love, instead of traveling to love.
Well, for like podcast specifically, or just in general for the kinds of things we might be interested in. I mean, certainly the obvious example is the one that is literally that, which is trying to understand foreign. Like at least my favorite bloggers is Matt Lakeman, and he just does these deep dives into countries he visits. I highly recommend it. What is the URL? mattlakeman.com.
Matt Lakeman is amazing.
Yeah,
one of my all-time favorites.
I feel like, research is clearly one where, especially if it's something where it's just code. So fundamentally, you could participate or try to see if you can grok it. What are yours? Do you have any ideas? What are some other areas like this? Like you're reading about Stalin, for example. I mean, but you lived in Russia. So what could you do to better understand that era and Stalin?
Being born in Russia is actually a very good example of this. I find that people who never lived in a country like this just don't have a sense of what like government can be like. in America, government is on your side fundamentally. I think this is why I like this country so much. Yeah. And in Russia, it's just not. Yeah. And for example, when I think Americans are just so idealistic, and so for example, they try doing all kinds of international projects and interacting with the governments, and they always have the same problem. They didn't anticipate that the government fundamentally was not on their side. Mm-hmm. Government it has its own game to play. Yeah. So and here living in Russia and just for years, and then also for me, I have a history of wanting to work in the Russian government, and then I stopped after I spent significant time just being immersed in there and seeing what's happening, and I realized, wait, no, the government is not on the side of the people. The government and so I think this was also important for me in this realization. But I think just indeed living in the place that you want to understand is probably a very good one.
Yeah, that kind of makes me want to travel to China, because this will be the second China episode I do. The first one isn't out yet. So
Tyler has a blog post about AI and how, in a way, it's similar to the advent of the printing press, meaning that the world is changing for real, right? People used to talk a lot about the Great Stagnation, and indeed, last 50 years, no really huge wars in the world, no really great technological changes. Yeah. And now that it might be changing, the thing that I am wondering about, is it possible to travel to times of change in a way, to understand what's happening with the world and with the AI, and to learn to live in that world, I guess, as well.
I guess I don't see the connection between AI and living in Ukraine, because the rest of the world would turn into Ukraine with AI, or what?
That's a lot of change.
Imbibe in the change vibe.
Yeah, change in general. Our lives are stable, right?
Yeah.
In a way, I think it's something not only lives are stable, but also, great wars were started by the printing press, right? Great social disturbance, great, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know if you're going to see the sun tomorrow. No. So this kind of thing.
And then the question is, will visiting those places give you a better sense of what the world will be like when, for example, AI starts changing the world in a big way?
Something like that, yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, possibly. And in some sense, the war is aided by advances in technology, right? The drone shit and everything.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Did reading Cairo change your life?
It depends on what you mean by change my life. In some sense, a lot of things have changed my life. In some sense, I did things I wouldn't have otherwise. I wrote a blog post about it. In that sense, my life has changed. I wouldn't have otherwise written that blog post.
But do you go about your life differently, having read
Yes. And this contradicts maybe the thing I said earlier about how you can't learn these things from the book anyways, so why bother? Here's how I changed it. Actually, I got much more reinforced in the idea that you just go balls to the walls if you want something really bad. And there's so many different fun examples in the book to read where Johnson wants a bill to pass or he wants something to happen, and just working day and night, calling every single person who could make a difference, thinking strategically about how to manipulate pieces to get that thing to happen. And I have the much, it's much less climactic in my case, because what I'm trying to do is get a guest on my podcast, right? But also, I just learned that it's not even specific tactics. It's just the idea that, no, I really want this to happen. I'm going to email all the people who are relevant to try to make this happen and try to talk people into it. And not in a Machiavellian way where I'm lying to them or something, obviously, but just in, I really want this. I want this to happen.
Your friends get more annoying messages from you asking them if they know anyone.
Yeah, kind of, basically, right.
What I hear is something similar to your reading of David Deutsch actually is that your maybe complaint in a way to the world about him is that people aren't taking what he writes seriously. Like they don't take his ideas seriously.
Yeah.
And to me, like you're taking ideas seriously from Deutsch seems very similar to you taking ideas seriously from reading Caro. And I guess this is in a way fascinating in itself. Like when I read about Stalin, for example, like what one of the way that his biographer was characterizing him was as a person who took ideas seriously, right? Like why was he so driven about Marxism? Like so many people read about Marxism and like they didn't decide to dedicate their lives. And well, perhaps not a perfect analogy.
Not the analogy I want.
But something about taking ideas seriously is very fascinating. What else do people not take seriously that makes you angry? Or that you're surprised by, I guess.
The AI stuff, obviously, but you're familiar with this. Like we're in San Francisco where people do take this seriously. Outside, people are aware this is happening. And in some sense, they just haven't priced in how much the world's going to change given their own framework of what will happen when you scale up these models. Like what happens when you train a model that costs $100 billion to train? And what is the impact of that on the world? And I personally haven't. Like, have I written down a Google Doc as you would insist that I do about what I should be doing before the time that $100 billion model is trained? Am I still going to be hosting a podcast then? Yeah, so maybe I'm mad at myself for not taking seriously the AI stuff.
Why are you mad at yourself? Why is there disunity?
It's not disunity. I feel like I should just write down a Google Doc of. I think I did at some point though.
But like, why is there this conflict?
Okay, so the AI happens afterwards, and I've asked all my podcast guests who are in AI about this, and none of them are going to be a good answer. The AI happens. What do we want the world in the post-AI future to look like?
Post-AGI.
Yeah, exactly. Like with superhuman gods. And it's clearly not the world in which the superhuman gods are our slaves forever, right? In 100 years, they're not going to be our slaves. Or we wouldn't want a world where they're our slaves. I wouldn't, especially if they're like an entity that wants its own things. So then what do we want? Do we want to turn humans into gods? But then there's a whole bunch of issues there, right? If you turned an ant to have the intelligence of a human, would it still be an ant? Like if you make a human the intelligence of a god, will it still be a human? It's just like, or are you just feeding a human brain through a hash function that on the other end spits out a godlike intelligence? Anyways, so this is just, you can go through a whole list of considerations.
Do you have an answer to this question?
Yeah, I would like to live in a world that's broadly allows people to live out different visions of what would be beautiful and creative. I would be super bummed if there was just like, if for some reason, because of totalitarian control or because it was necessary to prevent some sort of like bomb that cost $50,000 that could destroy the universe, we had to have some sort of centralized command of everything. I would also be bummed if one party got to control, just like expanded first and got to control vast swaths of the universe. I would be bummed if we weren't allowed to use these models at all. Like we just had paused before then and nothing cool like this happened.
So you're a galaxy conservative. You want to keep the late 20th, early 21st century Western college-educated values of pluralism, liberty, democracy, self-expression.
Self-expression, definitely. Because this is something to worry about, right? I don't know. I should ask somebody at some point on the podcast about these alignment tools. How worried are we that they just fall in the wrong hands and it's just basically mind control for the rest of the time of you just have AIs who can completely mind control. But self-expression, so I would definitely want AIs that can like reason and like disagree even with their human overlords about like what is best to do. But I don't think there needs to be democracy. I would just like for, you have your own planets and galaxies and star systems. And then some form of, well, we don't want people who just expanded into space to have claims to it just because they got there first. So some form of like Georgism in space. that like funds the infrastructure that connects star systems together or something, so that but then people still keep their profits, and there's so much stuff out there. We can have like tons of cool shit happen, just like beauty and creativity, and I don't know. But what's your take of what should happen in the post-AGI world?
As a early 21st century Western college-educated young adult, I think I'm very much the embodiment of the some very deep reverence for the values of pluralism and democracy and self-expression and all of these things. It's very difficult for me to imagine the world that is like fundamentally good, in which the power and control is centralized, or self-expression is not allowed, or there is just one value system that everyone must obey. And so, in a way, but this really makes me, this makes me a little bit uncomfortable, because I realize that these are just the values that are in a way limited in space and time, and like maybe our children will have some kind of crazy values, just like every next generation does. That will be the opposite of the kinds of space democratic capitalism that we imagine, and that we both will be very uncomfortable with.
So I think that democratic is not that important to me, especially given the fact that I don't think it's going to be that possible if you can just make like trillions of copies of an AI. Like how do votes work? But I do want like nonviolent ways to resolve conflicts, which is kind of what democracy is.
That's exactly what democracy is, right? Like democracy is just like non-violent way to solve political problems.
Yeah. And I do want to people to just monopolize the profit. Like I think like I don't know. I still feel like Georgism is a great way to, especially in space, to think about the just you don't want people just gobbling up resources, but you also want like this is the same debates we have on Earth about like you want markets, you want liberty, and so yeah. I've been meaning to like write blog posts about this, because I feel like this is a super important question of what should the future look like, and I feel like who's thinking about this? Because even people who talk about alignment, right? Okay, so you have alignment. Let's say I pose this question to you: we have a human level AI, and now we have fully solved the alignment. So you can write on a piece of paper, here's the values I want this AI to have. And it will, to its best of its ability, it will try to understand what you mean, and to its best of its ability, enact that. And then it's about to launch the intelligence explosion, and like the rest of history will commence. Just like do the things that based on the thing you put on this sheet of paper. What do you put on that sheet of paper? Even this is after you solve the alignment, and I feel like what is the answer to that question?
For me,
yeah. And more broadly, that like
I would not write anything.
Oh, really?
Why would I want AI to have its own values?
Or it's going to have some like objective function, right?
I mean, we already have AI that writes blog posts almost as well as I do. For all intents and purposes, like as far as I'm concerned, AI is here, and it's been here for a couple of years. So, and we know what the instructions for AIs look like. We know what kind of RLHF reinforcement learning from human feedback we do to give it its values. And like, to me, fully aligned AI is just an AI that amplifies us, that follows our instructions, that allows each individual human and humanity at large to become more capable of doing what they want to do, and in like fulfilling our values. And so to me, this question doesn't even seem well posed, to be honest.
Are you denying the possibility that you could have, even though you don't think like these systems are agentic, that it's possible to have super smart agentic systems?
I think it is possible. I just don't. Well, first of all, I'm not sure if I believe in like fast takeoff and intelligence explosion as a concept.
So if I forget about it, yeah, but is it possible to have a system that's like?
Yes, it is possible, but I guess I just would not do it.
I feel like there.
If you're asking me like what I would write instruction in an AI that I would like someone would launch in this way, I'm like I just would try not to launch it.
Yeah, but you're not going to be the one deciding. I think these are going to be economically very valuable.
I'm not as sure. I think if we don't want this to happen, it's not going to happen. Like I think history teaches us that Lyndon Johnson, he really wanted something to happen. He made it happen. You really want someone on your podcast, you get them on your podcast.
But there's Lyndon Johnson on the other side also, Alexei. Somebody who really wants to make this.
Well, this is exactly what you could have told Lyndon Johnson, and yet he became president.
I feel like this is like way too high level about like the specific economic incentives that like in this case would lead to.
Yeah, I guess I don't believe in economic incentives.
What? What are you talking about?
I don't think there was an economic incentive for Lyndon Johnson to spend all of this effort. I don't think there was an economic incentive for Kara to write all of this books. I don't think there is an economic incentive for you doing the podcast. I think at the end of the day, like the things that drive us the most are things like desire for truth, desire for greatness.
But the asymmetry here is that it just takes one person or one startup or one company that has this incentive.
I mean, not if it's against the law and the society prevents them.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. Like, unless there's like a law that, but it would have to be like a global law to prevent this.
Not necessarily. Well, the countries have the ability to enforce laws outside their territorial boundaries sometimes.
Okay, so there's a possible world in which we get the U.S. to like literally nuke anybody who tries to build this AI. But short of that, I think it's an important question of like
there are lots of other tools. Like if you think about chip restrictions, for example, right? The U.S. created restrictions on import of chips to China, and a bunch of European countries and companies weren't very happy about this. For example, if you remember, Netherlands, like really wasn't thinking, wasn't feeling too well about enforcing these restrictions, and then without any nukes, any laws, anything like particularly legible happening, Netherlands changed its mind.
You're like, is your claim that it's like for sure we're going to be able to, not only will we be able to convince the U.S. that we should ban these kinds of systems, but also convince the U.S. to take extraordinary measures of export controls and failing that war to prevent any other country from doing this? I feel like there's a world in which that happens. I'm just like not sure why you're sure this is going to happen.
If you do everything, you win.
Whatever. All right. We can. I don't know how much more there's to say on. I just think this is like a serious possibility. Like we should think about what.
You're not listening to me. Like you are not taking care seriously enough. Like if there's one lesson in the entire like 50 years of him writing books is if you do everything, you win. But and you keep asking me, well, but what if you don't win? What if you don't do everything? And I'm like, if this really matters as much as you claim, if it's the entire history of the universe, intelligence explosion, like everything hinges on this one thing.
I don't think it hinges on this one thing. I think, first of all, it could be the case that, here's a great example from the Johnson books, Vietnam, right? Johnson is the kind of person who does everything. It just, if the forces on the ground are completely opposed to you, there's nothing, like the Vietnam War was already lost by 68. Johnson could do everything, quote unquote, or 67.
No, he clearly could have done 10x more, and he didn't, because he didn't want it that much.
But there's a whole bunch of reasons. I don't think the analogy. First of all, it could just be the case that as GPTs get smarter, they become more agentic, and in which case, like the AI training in general just gets you there.
We observe empirically this has not been the case, and even if they do, we can control the degree of agency.
Why are you so sure that will always be the case? They're like pretty dumb right now. I feel like as it gets smarter, it's like,
I don't think they're dumb. I think like GPTs already like smarter than us, definitely smarter than me in a lot of ways.
I feel like this is a separate conversation hole. I'm like happy to go down it, but if you wanted to go down a different hole, I'm also happy to go down a different hole.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like if you're asking me like what are the values that I would embody in an AI, the answer is I don't know what the future is going to look like. I don't know what values are correct. I don't know like what radically different world looks like. So would do my best to be careful and and to to hope that like we individually and collectively do our best, I guess.
Yeah, and this is something you can program in. It's like, but I would love for like a specific. I guess you could just like write on the piece of paper, like be careful and hope for the best. But then,
I mean, what you're really asking, I think, is less of values that one would encode and more about, my bucket list or something.
Or just like, what do we want the future to look like in a world with like super intelligent AIs?
It might worth asking something like, imagine that the AI is here and it can help you fulfill one item on your bucket list. Like, what is it that you make it help you do?
Yeah, this is, I think, driving at a different thing. This is like what I want, but
But this reveals the very deeply like what the person wants the world to look like, right?
But that's like fundamentally the question I'm interested in is like what do we want? Because you could say, for example, the founding fathers, right? The Industrial Revolution is about to happen. You are creating a constitution that defines the government under which this will happen. There's certainly, they should leave room open for people in the future to be able to decide policies and improve things. But also they shouldn't just write on the Constitution, hey, you guys figure it out, be cautious. Like you need to define some sort of structure to make sure that things happen in a...
I mean, this is basically what they did, didn't they?
No, but there were specific things. They thought a lot about specific mechanisms in the government. And I would like somebody to think about like specific mechanisms that ensure that the future, while giving agency to future people still does like the total worst outcomes of like totalitarian AIs or something doesn't happen.
If the thing that you're worried about is totalitarian AIs, then like fundamentally what matters is like who controls like the replication and the growth of AIs. If AIs start to control their replication and growth and their energy input, then AIs win. If we control this stuff, then we win.
I think it's just like super hard to be in control, especially as they get much, much smarter. I think the key is like you have to have a system where even if the AIs are in control, it's not going to be catastrophic.
Yeah, I guess I just like am tempted to reject the premise of like, oh, like what do you do to AI that's much smarter than you? Because like we control the pace of technology. The humanity has much more control over the pace of technology than like I think people commonly believe, and we're going to be getting smarter. AIs make us smarter, and so as AIs become smarter, we become smarter, and then we can always restrict the pace of technological progress so that it's comfortable for us, and so the intelligence like roughly matches, and that we're never in a position where AI can just go and overtake because it's like 100 points.
These are just like generic things, but it's really like talking at a vague level, but it just doesn't like grapple with the specific ways in which the AI is getting smarter at the hardware software level, and you get like better outputs from GPT-3. It's just like not the same pace of improvement of your capabilities. You have like better search, and they are like literally like IQ of like 200.
No, but at the end of the day, here's one example. Like, human cloning is not happening. Like all of these arguments that you're making, like
because it's not that economically valuable. If it was, it would definitely be happening.
Like dog cloning is happening. It's clearly economically valuable. Are you saying that a huge amounts of people wouldn't clone their relatives, spouses, whoever else, John von Neumann? Like, are you saying that cloning John von Neumann is not economically valuable?
I'm talking about like trillions of dollars, which is what AI is.
Cloning John von Neumann? Like, do you realize that how many of these AGI companies would clone 1 million of them if they could? And we have the technology. The technology has been present for decades because, like, in fact, humans do clone a huge number of living organisms, and yet there is no human cloning. And you could say, think about China. How incredibly economically valuable for China would it be right now to clone a lot of geniuses? And yet nobody is cloning humans. Maybe there are isolated, like secret military examples, but it's just not happening, even though technology is present and it's very economically useful. But like the human culture, like the humanity at large that they keep appealing to, like there is no international body that says no human cloning. Like every individual company, in every country, like at the end of the day, decided, let's just not do it. And we're not doing it.
Like I would just like more assurance that we're counting on every single person who's a human to not do this.
Every single person,
or even every single institution. Like there's
institution.
okay. So here's the thing. There's literally people, humans, who want to kill innocent babies. We saw that on October 7th, right? There's people who completely disagree with you on a fundamental level about your values. Forget about disagreeing with you on like whether we should train a AG. Like there's people who think training like super agentic AIs is a really great idea and that's the future of humanity. There's people who think killing babies is a great idea. Like there's the humans who completely disagree with you who are in charge of nation states, right? There's like Iran, there's North Korea, there's people who have no influence over, who like completely disagree with a fundamental level. I think relying on humanity in general is like not that can't be the solution to this challenge.
You have a blog post about miracle years of Einstein and Newton and how they like did an incredible number of really important discoveries within like a year or two apart from each other, like within a year or two. What are the lessons? Like, how did they do it? Like, what can we do in order to get more miracle years ourselves?
So one thing clearly is that they were really young when their miracle years happened, which is indication that you can't start these things when you're young and attempt them. Newton was 22, I think. Einstein was 24. But the one that I feel like people didn't talk that much about, which was I thought was super cool. You know, Brandon Sanderson, the fantasy novelist. He wrote like 6 novels during the pandemic, and that was one of the miracle years examples I used, and that was the one that was kind of relevant in the sense that you can just be super productive in a short amount of time. You just output things that you would think would take years or if not decades. And if you're just concentrated in the zone you can just be extremely prolific. Then there's other sorts of lessons that are more meta level about how institutions should organize so that more miracle years happen. Those are sort of the personal things.
How should they?
So one thing is definitely don't interrupt people while they're having their miracle year, or interrupt people who could be having a miracle year. One of the examples I think I remember using was Jean von Neumann, how he just had all these different engagements from the Manhattan Project and then with the Cold War stuff of wargaming things. And so he was never just, never did have this sort of period to have a miracle year. And yeah, if somebody is a super successful scientist, don't put them all like a bunch of shit in a committee. But I feel like these are super generic things. I feel like you would know more the actual specifics of what institutions should do, having run the institution to speed up science.
I mean, the things that you say actually sound very concrete to me. Yeah. They're like, and they kind of remind me of you like being unemployed after college, which allowed you to do this thing, right? It's all about indeed like letting people just do work and like not be bothered, right? Newton was when like
plague.
Right, he was studying in Cambridge, and then he left Cambridge and was by himself for a year, right? Yeah. And like nothing else to do, like except for doing physics. And Einstein was not in a university, right? He had his day job that wasn't very intellectually stimulating, and then he had all of his time being unknown to anyone to just do physics, and so. I know. I guess maybe one concrete thing that's kind of funny that comes to my mind is living in San Francisco.
Leaving or living in?
Living as in not being here. Because I get like 3 party-full invitations a week. And I take interviews from people who fascinate me. I guess this is the first one that I did in San Francisco. But there is just like, it feels like a giant co-working space, and like there's always stuff to do, always people to talk to, companies to work at, like the collective. I kind of wonder about, going to New York, because people in New York don't think about AI, and this is precisely why it might be a good place to think about this.
Maybe, although I'm trying to think, are there examples where somebody left the place, the big thing was happening, and that enabled them to have even greater insight about the big thing? There could be. I wonder with technology if... Because when Newton wasn't leaving a place where they were discovering orbital mechanics, do orbital mechanics even better, right? Or Einstein wasn't in the university, they wouldn't have been discussing special relativity, and then he decided to do it independently. Yeah, I wonder if it's technology that's progressing really fast. It actually is really useful to be in the place where people are talking about the newest thing.
I'm not sure it's different, right? I don't think if you came to Newton in 1665 and been like, Isaac, yes, all the best physicists and scientists, natural philosophers of the generation are in this one place in Cambridge, and yes, you feel like you learn so much from them every day, and you have all of these great intellectual discussions, and you're making progress on all these problems. No, instead what you should do is leave this place, not talk to them for a year, just go sit, whatever, like hang out at your family estate, and you'll definitely make the biggest breakthrough of your career, and it'll be your miracle year. You'll do great discoveries. I think if you told this to Isaac, well, if you told this to Newton, he would laugh you out of the room.
Yeah, maybe. Actually, I'll take you back. Maybe that is a good idea.
Right.
But I think the main thing is honestly not even the people in San Francisco. It's like staying off Twitter. Because there's just a bunch of midwit takes about AI on Twitter. I think if you stayed in San Francisco and were off Twitter, you would get much more disconnection from the regression to the mean sort of regression to the mean pulls that you're worried about than you would get from leaving San Francisco but still staying on Twitter.
You don't read Twitter?
I am on Twitter. I should not be on Twitter, but or not be paying attention to Twitter. But
Why the conflict? Why do you say that you should be on Twitter, but you're on Twitter?
I mean, I think I should have a Twitter account so I can promote my stuff. I just shouldn't be using it as a consumer.
So why do you?
It doesn't feel that bad, but it probably is in terms of if my work is having new ideas, then it probably is pretty bad. At the same time, but to be honest, I feel like I have compartmentalized. I don't talk about Twitter trending topics on my podcast. So I don't think it's interfering that much. It might be interfering in the sense that I don't even discover things in the first place. If I was learning about new ideas from the first place from just randomly browsing a library. So.
Have you tried staying off Twitter for a week and seeing what happens?
No consumption, only producing.
I mean, you never know how much harm, right?
Yeah.
If you haven't tried not doing it.
I'll start now.
We'll see. Maybe perhaps it's going to be the beginning of your endless mirabilis.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, I've started. This is actually a good point. It's really useful to have somebody like you around who can just be like, have you tried X?
Yeah. Do 1 hour of alignment research.
I don't even know, what could you do in an hour? You can, look at Neil Monda's list.
Well, learn. You can do a lot in 1 hour. You're a very smart guy. I know that if you're left alone by yourself for an hour with a piece of paper, with a prompt of, okay, let's do some alignment research, you're going to do something interesting.
What happened when you tried this?
I would get research ideas that when I started working on the OpenAI, I learned are either at the frontier or ahead of the frontier just taking this 1 hour at a time to think about different topics. And then I would talk to people, and it turns out that, actually, this sounds right, and nobody thought about this before. And then, it resulted, I know. I don't see why this is not going to happen to you as well.
I think the actual technical alignment, I feel like it would be beside the point.
I know that you can, you'd be happy to spend an hour doing all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that you're so against taking an hour to think about alignment.
But it would be the equivalent to me being to take an hour to solve physics.
1 hour.
Just take 1 hour. I tell you, take 1 hour to solve physics.
I literally did this, and it was great. I did a bunch of, crackpot physics. I tried to derive E equals mc squared from first principles.
Did you?
Yes.
How?
I can show you. It's in my notebook. I just spend an hour imagining things, I was like imagining energy, and I was imagining things interacting. I was like, okay, like what should be the terms? And I was like, okay, here feels like it should be a square given how things are interacting, like how would the energy be transferred? And I was like, oh wait, I think this actually like leads to here being a different power. But then I was like, and then eventually I was like, oh yeah, E equals mc squared. Took me an hour. And I showed it to a friend, and he was like, that seems to kind of make sense, or at least like not complete garbage. And I'm like, it's like an hour well spent.
All right, I just think technical alignment is not the thing I'm focused on, or like I would have any. I wouldn't but there's other questions. I think this is a good advice.
Travel versus reading history.
Yeah, maybe we'll see.
I don't want to extract the promise from you. Yeah. I guess it's just fascinating to me that alignment is the first thing that you say, like, if not podcasting, like help alignment. And then you are really against spending 1 hour thinking about it. Anyway, so the actionable from thinking about miracle years, I guess, is have Black Death travel to your country and force you to your family's house. And in contrast to what happened to all of us during COVID, where we wasted 2 years reading Twitter and playing video games, not doing anything good, don't go on Twitter and don't play video games.
Somebody had that tweet. Shit.
So sad, right? In retrospect, like you could have written 6 novels during COVID. I could have done it, and I spent the entire time reading Twitter and stuff.
Somebody said the COVID shows you that if you were locked up in jail if you were innocent and locked up in jail, whether you would spend the time getting buff and well read, or whether you would just waste away.
Yeah. That sounds about right. So what are you thinking about these days?
We've just recently been reading the Gulag Archipelago, and really I find it so fascinating. Like it's one of the most fascinating books about human psychology and sociology ever, or at least the ones I've read. Have you read it? Yeah. What do you think? I feel like I'm just recovering because I just fresh read it, and I'm just like, oh my god, there's so much interesting shit in there.
Tell me more.
Oh, the first chapter is about arrest, right? And do you remember the part where he says, "Why didn't we resist? We just had this sense of, oh, we're innocent, so of course this is gonna get sorted out." It's like, no, it's not gonna. Like, they're gonna take you to the torture chambers. If you don't like make a scene right now, you're dead anyways. And then also just a bunch of stuff about how horrible the gulags were, which you can understand in the generic terms, but actually viscerally understanding what it would have been like is something else. This is something you understand probably from living there, but something I didn't understand until reading the book. And I'm sure I don't understand it at its full depth, but how a totalitarian system turns people against each other, makes people informers to destroy trust in a society to the advantage of the system. You know what I mean? Of like, you don't know if your colleague is going to inform on you. You don't even know if your family's going to inform on you. And so there's no trust.
There's so many KGB required people to give them the names of people who the person they got knew to get the next batch. Yeah. And they like would torture people until they get the names. And so countless number of people were sentenced to die essentially by their friends. Yeah.
I remember this story in East Germany in East Germany. Afterwards, they released the records of who had informed on whom for reconciliation purposes. And this woman finds out that her partner had ratted her out. You know what I mean? Just like finding out that kind of information afterwards is insane.
Right.
And then the chapter on children was horrifying. Where the 12-year is your earliest 12 years old, you can be sent to the gulags and executed.
But like, this is the book. Like, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I have just recently interviewed Young Chang, who wrote a book about living through the culture of a revolution. And I don't have like new takes on any of these things, except for the fact that you learn about it for the first time, and it's just horrifying, and it kind of sticks with you. And other than that, like the AI stuff is sort of vague background.
What do you have strong takes on?
I have strong takes on like I'm against it.
No, but I think, like what makes you angry in the world? Like what do you wish people would just understand?
Oh, I'm reading Wild Swans and her biography of Mao, Yang Cheng's biography of Mao. I'm really pissed off that the portrait of Mao hangs off Tiananmen Square, and that Mao is so revered by the Chinese regime, despite the fact that he's the biggest mass murderer in history. And that really pisses me off. And it's doubly insidious because not only has he killed more people than anybody else in history, and then a powerful country worships him, but also because his regime killed their own people, his victims are the ones who have to worship him, right? It'd be as if a picture of Hitler was hung off the Temple Mount in Israel.
Right.
I think that's like really bad.
Yeah. You don't look very angry though. You sounded way angrier when talking about David Deutsch.
I guess. I don't know. I'm like not. Right now, I'm not in that mode. But like when I was reading about it, I was really angry.
Well, so we all get very angry in the moment, but like you haven't read any of David Deutsch for years, and like when I asked you, like, this is real. I could see it like bothers you.
Damn, you got me. I don't know. Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And when you were talking about how podcasts, people ask bad questions during podcast interviews, I could see it really bothered you. And this Mao portrait stuff, and the millions of people. I don't know. You look very happy.
Okay, that's funny. We can close on that.
Wait. I have one more question.
Okay, go for it.
One more question. Tell me your favorite joke.
There's a scene in The Office where Michael is talking about his. There's a scene in The Office where Michael is talking about a movie he wants to produce, and he says he had no arms or legs. He couldn't see, hear, or speak. This is how he led a nation.